So perfect. So hello everybody, and welcome to our second edition of the Schwarz IT Meetup here on YouTube. Thank you for joining. Hope you're doing all fine today. My name is Rego. I am an iOS developer at Schwarz IT, and I will be the moderator of today's event. So today we have one session which will last for about 40 minutes. And based on the feedback of the last session, we are trying to make it a little bit more interactive this time by also allowing questions during the presentation. So please don't hesitate, and please feel free to write down your questions into the YouTube chat. And we are constantly scanning all of your questions and then try to answer them immediately. And also our speaker, Engin, he told us that he's very eager and very open for discussions and for questions. So please use this chance and ask everything that you want to know. And also at the end of the talk, there will be some time for some remaining questions. So there you also can ask additional questions. And now, without further ado, let's welcome Engin with his talk, Policy as a Code, and how the Schwarz IT ensures compliance and security.
Okay, thanks a lot, Rico, for the warm introduction, and welcome everybody again for today's meetup. A little or a short talk about policy as code, how we at the Schwarz IT going to ensure that our compliance and security is all the time met, even in a very agile cloud environment. So I will talk about this today. As Rico mentioned, feel free to ask any question. I prefer mostly not so difficult ones because for the other ones I need to use Google. So feel free to type your questions in. As usual, a little doc tag to see who I am. My name is Engin. I'm since 2017 in the Schwarz group, formerly in the legal development, business development area. My main focus is in cloud transformation and enablement. So we take care that our internal development teams are ready for the whole cloud journey and to enable together new practices on how to use cloud technology in our projects. And as usual, the motto is continuous everything. So this is a theme you will see also in this presentation. And of course, I worked in different areas, as you can see, from hospitality to finance. So it's areas where you either have a strong compliance because you're an American company, for example, as the Hilton Group was, or you have the BaFin, our finance institution here in Germany, in terms of the Wüstenrot. So always having some compliance in my bag. Quickly setting the scene to say where we are not going to do a session and explaining what is infrastructure as code. For us, especially infrastructure as code means the foundation. It's the key opener. It's the place where we start, okay, now we can describe our deployments in a cloud environment. Everything is as code. So from here, we can continue our journey. It's just the beginning, as you can see. So the foundation is laid down. A quick for everybody, maybe a little bit going into detail and say, what is infrastructure as code? Infrastructure as code defines the process of managing and provisioning all our data, all our computer resources in a machine readable file. That's most important. It doesn't matter which tool you're using because tools are really plenty out there for every different case. The most important part is to say, okay, we have the definition as code. We checked it into our source control system. So that's one important part to say how we're going to define infrastructure as code. And of course, what is hot right now at the moment, we say, okay, for us here in the Schwarz IT, Terraform, Polumi, that's the big players we are looking at the moment and say they are really filling a gap in our system. But as I mentioned before, there are different tools, and I'm sure that everybody has this tool of preferences. And as long as this fits the job, I think it's completely fine to continue with this. What are the achievements? What are we trying to do? What did we resolve with our infrastructure as code? Infrastructure is now code. That's something really, really nice to see and new to see. Okay, now we have to treat them in the same way. This is the part where the development teams have all the time the benefits, because they have everything as code. So they established already some processes around this. For example, some kind of Git flows, how new features come into my main branch, how do I deliver my main branch, how do I build releases, and so on. So now we have the infrastructure also part of this. What we achieved also is we can now spawn multiple environments on demand. We can even spawn an environment just for our pull request to say to our business, say, hey, I finished my new feature. Please, can you go onto following DNS or IP address and see on your own and give your confirmation and say everything is fine. This feature can be rolled out, or if you work with feature toggles, it's even easier to say here, go to the specific environment, activate your feature toggle, and then you can see the latest feature. So there are different ways now, and you could even use this to spawn just for you as a developer an environment in a cloud runtime and say, okay, this is only for me for developing. I start to deploy parts of the infrastructure there and work with my local development part. And of course, now we can also ensure the permission and access controls. We have to think about different roles and have to say, okay, do we really launch our infrastructure from the laptop? Additionally, what is also for me quite interesting and quite new is that I can start now to unit test my infrastructure. And of course, I can think about my integration testing. So this is a whole lot of achievements you can get when you move to infrastructure as code. Also, now the big question comes now, okay, we have everything as infrastructure as code. What are the next steps? And these are the policies, for example. We have now to think about, okay, there are policies defined from external companies, external standards, for example, the SOC or the GDPR, what comes from a law, a European law, for example. So we have compliance policies. They have to be ensured that it's that my application aligns with these policies. And of course, I have my security policies. I have policies, what is best practices here in the company to say, okay, these are the stuff we don't want. This enables some security holes which could temper our application. So it should be fixed. And of course, we have the operational excellence. We have to take care to say, okay, if, for example, I have a workload, I always need to take care that this certain specific type of workload is always start, for example, with a replica count of 2. So I take care that when my service degrades because one node is going to die or I have some extreme load on my system, I can still take care that the service gets still delivered. So this could be something set it. So, but now the big question is who is going to ensure that this compliance is met? And to be honest, at the moment, I don't think, I'm not sure that it applies to every company, but at least to the companies I've worked for, is that we have the so-called Council of Excel. So we have massive amounts of spreadsheets would get distributed. It's a manual process, so I have to apply for this compliance checking. I have to say, okay, can you please come to my project and check my application or my project if it's compliant with the actual in-place rules the company has. I'm not even sure when any compliance are changing. Is there some changes? I will get this only on a certain time. And of course, the feedback, depending on the size of my project, it could take weeks to come back with a feedback of the compliance team or the persons who are performing the compliance audit or the audit in general, either compliance security or operational policies. And it will take maybe even the same amount of time to fix this kind of findings in my audit. So this is something we think it's not something you should have, and it's in our opinion too late to do this kind of stuff. So the big question is how we can optimize this. So in my opinion, it's the time we always talk about shift left in different contexts. So shift left in terms of security. We get, for example, vulnerability scanning, shift left in terms of testing. So we could also say shift left auditing. Let us perform our auditing in the earlier stage of our software development lifecycle to get the best outcome. So how could this look like? This is a very oversimplified software development lifecycle to say we have our local development, we have continuous integration and so-called production environment or a prod environment. So as we know from our from the theory, we know that in local development we can react very fast on it, and findings in security, in bugs, and so on, found in local development is quite easy and quite fast to change, and it is a change that will not cost us so much. And the further we go down the line to the production environment or to a production situation, it starts to become slower. So when we're on a CI part and we already start to work here, changes will be slower to implement. And the worst case we have in our production environment, it gets really slower, and it's more cost. It will cost us more to implement this kind of findings here. So what makes sense, or what is the situation at the moment? The persons who perform the compliance and the auditing process, they always come into a production environment. So in my opinion, it's quite late from the stage, because we are now already started to roll out the application in a production environment. So findings will be on the production environment and gets played back. So the changes will be mostly will cost us more. So what could make sense here to say, okay, let us do our automated auditing in an earlier stage, to say, okay, when I start to develop, I'm on my local IDE, I start to develop, I start to change or to work on the infrastructure as code part, and I can apply this now locally, and I will get all the auditing, the actual auditing, instantly during my local development. And if I did something wrong or forgot something what is necessary inside the company because it belongs to the compliance, I get the feedback, and I can change it instantly before I create my pull request and send it out. I can get the feedback. And I could also enable this as a hook also to say, okay, even in my continuous integration part, when I create the pull request, there could be a build validation running, and also deliver the feedback for the person who do the pull request review to say, hey, there are compliance issues and you need to fix them. And I don't need to approve it. I don't need to take stuff into my main branch, what could temper the production environment. Please fix the stuff. So now we have different situations where we get quickly feedback and can quickly react onto the situation. So what are we evaluating at the moment? That's the most interesting part, to say, okay, how are we going to do policy as a code? What kind of tools are the Schwarz IT is using or is evaluating at the moment? Because we know in the ecosystem out there, there are plenty of open source solutions, there are paid solutions. There are enterprise solutions. So we say, okay, what are we testing at the moment? For us, because we have also the part of the infrastructure as code, where we work closely with our operation guys to say, okay, when you define in a team or in a cross-functional team the infrastructure, what could be possible solutions also to write policy as code? So we found that Polumi Crossguard is a very nice framework for enabling policies across infrastructure deployment and Kubernetes deployment. So this is one candidate we have on our list. And of course, Terraform Sentinel to say, okay, we have projects who are working with Terraform, who created really nice Terraform scripts. So for them, Terraform Sentinel could be an option to write their policies and to enforce the policies. And of course, we are looking in the open policy agent, the institution in the open source area for a general purpose policy engine who could even policy your Kubernetes deployments, but also go in API gateways, for example, traffic and so on, and set there and check there some policies. So this is also a really nice tool we are evaluating at the moment. So let us deep dive a little bit more into two of them and see how we could create this kind of policies and take care that these policies get rolled out to the developers. So, quick introduction to the Polumi Crossguard. Polumi Crossguard is a policy you can write in TypeScript, or you can write it in Python, and the guys from Polumi are really hard working to enable other languages. So you have the possibility to write your policy in a language you already understand, or you agree with your operations team and say, okay, could we, for policies we do internally in our project, could we work, for example, in TypeScript, but also see how other departments perform, and they say, okay, we only have knowledge in Python or in Go, for example. So this is quite fine. Polumi has three different policy levels. They say, okay, when you met or you did not met a policy, you defined its advisory. It says it would be nice if you would fix this issue. It's not a showstopper. You can still continue, but when you're there, please fix it if it doesn't take you so much time. Mandatory. That's really something, as the name says, you have to fix it. The Terraform, the Polumi script will not apply to your cloud environment. So it breaks there in a CI pipeline or a CD pipeline. There is the point where the CD will break and send out some message or whatever kind of notification you set into your policy to say, okay, there was an issue, you need to fix this. And of course, the disabled, who prevents the policy from running. And there are two types of policies you can apply. You can set the resource validation policy to get your feedback before the resource is created and updated on your cloud environment, and the stack validation policy, where you get the feedback after the stack is created or updated, but before the preview and update inside Polumi has completed. So there's some minor, some differences in the type of policies, and we at the moment have to find out what kind of policy makes sense in which situation. So it's not something we say, okay, we have vast experience at the moment to say, in this kind of policies, it makes sense to do it as a resource validation policy, or to go and say we need a stack validation policy. So we are working at the moment also to have a better understanding on how to set the policy. So this is the point for the Polumi Crossguard. Later, I will show you some pieces of code to have a better understanding. And of course, the policy agent. How does the policy agent works? On a high level, you can say you get a request, and the request gets divided between the query I want to do this kind of action, and the OPA, the Open Policy Agent, goes to his policy repository. Everything is written in Rego, our own description language, and you have the data in JSON, and depending on the rule sets you provided there comes the decision and gives you a feedback and say that makes sense. Here you are allowed to continue, or you're not allowed to continue. So that's how the Open Policy Agent works. As I said, it's a general purpose agent, so you can use them for testing your web methods or your Kubernetes deployments. This is really a powerful device. And some of the benefits of the Open Policy Agent, as I said, is the declarative policy language, Rego. at the first glance, you say, oh, a new language I have to learn, but I have honestly to say it's really straightforward, and even I managed to understand it. So I think it's not something you will take much time to understand. And the moment you get the idea on how Rego is working, it's really a breeze to write your application. And that makes also the charm of the Open Policy Agent to say, it's really interesting also for departments, maybe, for example, security departments, who maybe don't have the strong development experience to say, I write everything in TypeScript and so on, to use this kind of declarative language to say, okay, here I can still write everything down, and other tools could use the Rego to decide the policy. So that's an interesting part to say, is Rego the main repository where every tool should be chosen from, to say, okay, we have a central place where every tool, be it a CLI tool or a server-side tool, can go look up a specific rule and give feedback. So you have maybe one place to put your rules into it, but many clients or many customer tools or customer systems who can get the tools, the policies from there. And of course, you have all this kind of management APIs and a vast to test, debug, build environment policies. I mean, it's really a big thing, and feel free to check on your own the Open Policy Agent website to get more ideas on how you could use the Open Policy Agent, for example, in your company or in your environment. As you see, I'm really a fan of it. Yeah, this for the short. Let us see how the stuff is working, to say, okay, is it easy, and how would a policy look like when I write it in code? I prepared 3 cases. The one case would be Polumi in an Openstack environment, to say, okay, let us create really cloud native resources, virtual machines, networks, and so on, and apply there the policies. The second case would be on a Kubernetes environment to use the Open Policy Agent. In this case, we are going to use it as an admission controller. Admission controller means it interferes between your request and the Kubernetes API in terms of create or update situation, for example, and gives their feedback. And the last point would be to say, okay, I talked before about this. Would it not be nice to use Rego as the language where other tools could use the definition without writing it maybe in our own language, and say, okay, we use them, I already have them, so I could use the Rego files in a Kubernetes environment, for example, but I could also provide them for your Polumi deployment. So this is something I would like to show to you also. Okay, so let us hope that the showcase is working. Demos, always tricky situation. So I've created here different folders with different situations. So for example, in our OpenStack environment here, I created a simple OpenStack deployment. In Polumi, for example, I chose TypeScript as the language. And as you can see, I create my network, my subnet, and so on. To use, I also created a security group, and I'm sure that you already spotted some issues where you say, oh, this is not something I would like to see in a production environment. For example, the remote API, that doesn't make sense. And as you can see, also creating an instance where you can choose a specific flavor or a specific image could be something you would not really would like to have in your company. So let us see how a policy tag in Polumi would look like in the code. So you create your boilerplate. You say, okay, this is my policy as code, and I chose here, for example, the resource validation policy, just because I want to avoid that you have to wait in this demo. So I created 3 different policies, 2 mandatory and advisories. I mean, they are completely made up, and I'm sure that in a productive environment, the policies would look much different. So in this case, I would like also only have lowercase instance names. This could be a policy. You could even say there's a naming convention in your company. So any instance created should have a specific pattern. This is the place where you can check for them. I also created a policy to say I only want to limit flavors. So people are not allowed to use, for example, big machines with 200 cores and 2 terabyte of RAM, and say, okay, you have to stick to a specific type of flavor for your virtual machine in this case. So you can check this, you can define which is allowed. And as you can see, as it's a programming language, you can come up with much more rule set. And of course, the zero address. This is something I'm sure you already spotted. I set the zero address to say this is something I don't want that when I publish some ports in an ingress rule, I don't want that maybe everybody is allowed to access this. I can narrow down the allowed addresses to use this. This is some case. So what I could do now is, in this case with Polumi, feel free to look up for more details in the infrastructure as code area of Polumi. So in my case, I'm not using any central situation. I just want to show you how to set the policy tag. This part is completely optional. The moment you upload your policy tag to the central server of Polumi, and it gets automatically sent to your project when it's assigned to. So you could say this policy tag is a default and everybody gets it. Every person who works with Polumi and who uses the account of Polumi gets automatically the policy. But in this case, I just pointed manually with the -- policy tag. So in my case, we start now the Polumi preview, and goes through. He says what he wants to do. He wants to create the subnet, and he wants to create the rule and the instances, and bang, I will get my feedback here. I see that I used in my security group rule, I used the zero address, and this is something I would not like to have it. It's an advisory, maybe it's a mandatory stuff. As I said, again, it's really completely something made up. Here we get the name of the resource, so we can look and say, oh, let me quickly see where was it? Okay, here is it. It's the policy as code 22 for the SSR connection. And yeah, of course, I used the zero address. So I can change it here quickly now. And then I create the pull request, for example, and everything is fine. And I get instantly my feedback. But it's not only on resources, for example, but I can only also use it for the deployment in my Kubernetes area. And here's some interesting part also to show to you, and feature of Polumi. I can use already existing files. I could use my customize I have in my system. And for example, if I have my customized file, I could be disconnected from the policy as code. But what I could do now is I could create some wrapper Polumi files where I say, okay, here I include my already existing Helm chart or my already existing customized file. And now I can apply also my Polumi policy as codes here. And of course, you can do more. You can also start to temper the stuff and say, okay, I work here and I do some customizations also on code side because I have customized and I want to change. I want to level up the abstraction level. I want to go up and say I want to use now Polumi for my deployment. But just as to show to you guys, so I created the pod info from the internet. It's the customized file, and let us see what we are going to check here now. It's also something really made up, and here I just want to see if the Polumi label is set on deployment. So I take care that in my Kubernetes deployment there's always a label set called Polumi. Just maybe I have some kind of filters or some kind of actions running on it. It could be a use case, and how the same way to apply it, I just say Polumi preview also here, and here pointing to the policy tag. Now we can start the Polumi deployment. As you see, we use an Kubernetes. So he will now load the Kubernetes deployment. Here inside we see there's a horizontal pod autoscaler, a service and deployment. And as you can see in the deployment of the pod info deployment, the label is not set. Of course, I'm sure that Stefan is not setting Polumi label for us to do the showcase. So that's fine also. So this is the showcase where we say how to use the Polumi native policy as code. And if we go now for the OPA part, say, okay, how are we going to use OPA? That's also quite easy. Here in this case, we again check for the required labels. So the moment you install OPA, in this case, the gatekeeper in our system, you have this kind of custom resource definition where you can set the custom resource definition and can here define your Rego language. This you just enter as a text, as a string field. If you're not sure what your language or your Rego policy file is doing, there's also the possibility to use the Rego playground. As you can see, this is, for example, the place where I said, okay, let us see if on a deployment, Polumi is set as a label here just as a playground. So I create the rule. I say, okay, when the input, the type kind is deployment and the labels are not set, we get an error message. So you can also start to test it with some test data and you get your output. So the moment you evaluate this, you get, okay, here, Polumi, the label is not set. So, and if we want to set it, I hope now it's working. Okay, and you see the label is set and I get the feedback, and this is the thing you can set as an admission controller. So you just apply, let us go to the last place. So we just apply this custom resource definition to our Kubernetes cluster. We also say the definition, what we are looking for. So in this case, I just chose and say a namespace should have a label Polumi set, but you can also change the kinds and say every kind should have a label set. You can go deeper. I mean, it's really up to you guys. And here, just to say, here's an example namespace. So let us apply the namespace. I already applied everything on the cluster. And as you see, I get a message from the Kubernetes cluster and saying, hey, you have an error, your admission webhook denied the request, and I get also feedback. So in this case, either you're working in a GitOps environment or you're working with a kubectl environment in your pipelines. It's completely up to you, but you get the feedback and can work around this. So nothing changed on your cluster. There is nothing you need to fix on your side. But as you can see, this could be something depending on how you're working a little bit too late, because maybe this is something you get when you already, for example, merged something in a specific type of a branch and you did not align the rule sets. It could be something where you get the feedback maybe too late. So, and here comes the last possible solution in place to say, can we combine, for example, the nice Polumi stack to have the possibility to create your infrastructure and your policies as a code with the OPA Rego files. So in this case, I created here the one you already saw from the Kubernetes playground. I created here again as a .rego file. This is completely universal here in this case. And now I can just apply it again here with the policy pack. I just need to take care to say the runtime is OPA here in this case. And then it's the same. We are again in the pod info example, and then we apply just the policy pack with the OPA Rego. And everything should work fine. And yes, of course, we get again the error message that our label Polumi is not set. And as you see here, is the error message. Where does it differ from the Kubernetes policy tag? Before the error message was here Polumi not Polumi label is not set on the deployment resources. So there are two different policy tags who applied, and yeah. So that's it from the demo. Let us continue with our presentation. So what did we achieve now? Again, we have our council, we have people, we have a compliance team, and now there comes the funny part. This compliance team could not also could be other persons now. There could be the network team, it could be the security team, it could be the ops team who would like to enable their best practices for everybody because they build up some experience and say, okay, we would like to share this experience, not when something breaks and always calling and say, hey, there is an issue, and they say, yeah, because you did not set, for example, the resource tag, the classical thing, the resource limit and the request of the resources. And this is something, for example, an operation department or a different operation team could assemble in a central repository and provide for the whole company to get the information. They could even build up some policy rules, compliance rules for this kind of deployments. So you can define your policies now, so your policy is now stored in a central place. This is something we see with OPA, for example, with the Rego files. I can install this kind of policies to a central system. I really let it wait because there are different ways. For example, Terraform Enterprise with the Sentinel, Polumi with their policy as code and their server-side backend. You could use the OPA, for example, so different approaches to store your policies or to provide your policies. But how does it continue now? Now we have the dev and the ops part. They work either in a cross-functional team or maybe alone because the project has not the size to justify maybe to have dedicated persons taking care of the operational part. So maybe you're doing both in one person. You do your changes and you get your policies enforced. And this is something really, really nice to get the feedback here. And when you deliver something, it's really compliant to your standard the company agreed to. So I would say this is not bad because now we achieved something. We work together, we have a common artifact, we work together, and we can now enable the projects in different speeds to perform what they would like to perform. So a slow team or a project have the same rule sets when they need it in their time, in their environment, like a team who use, for example, a quite agile way of working together, and they keep on delivering. Every commit is a deliverment to productive environment. They really optimize their build and deployment pipelines, and they have everything on a high level of automation, so they can say, okay, we get also the feedback here, and this is something now people can work, so you don't need to call somebody, you don't need to wait for somebody, you don't need to ask for help, for example. You get the best practices, the security checks, and whatever compliance subjects you have in place in your company, you get them during local development or even in your CI pipelines. So this is a big achievement. So as there are no questions at the moment, we're coming to an end and would say, what are the key takeaways of this presentation? So as we said before, infrastructure as code is the foundation for us. This enables us policy as code. They should both go hand in hand so we can have a nice working story. We talked about the shift left auditing and say, okay, how shift left auditing helps us with automated auditing to get instant feedback, to deliver, to create projects or applications who are from the beginning compliant to your policy. So there's no big invests at the end of a project, or when it comes for general availability, when you want to roll out it, when you advertise it, that there's a situation where you say, hey, wait a minute, the compliance and the security guys already checked everything. Is everything compliant? Now you get the feedback here. We talked about the open policy agent. We did a short introduction. We also did a short introduction to the Polumi Crossguard to say how Polumi Crossguard differentiated to the OPA, and even go align with the OPA. A little demo of Polumi and the OPA to show how it's working in real life. And we talked about the achievement. What did we achieve now? What kind of work mode did we create it now inside the company? So people can create artifacts, can give feedback for other persons without even knowing them or without even talk to them, because they started the project, they did not have the chance, and they get, but still the project get all the relevant, compliant, relevant feedback for the deployments. So I would say that was quite quick, and thanks for your attention, and I'm completely open now for some questions and maybe for a nice discussion with you guys. So Rico, I give the word back to you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Engin, for your talk. I would say it was not bad. No, it was great. Right now we don't have any questions in the chat, but I think we'll wait for half a minute if there are some more questions, or if there's any question coming in. So let's just see at the chat.
The situation is that you need to have some kind of level already achieved to say, okay, what are the next steps I would like to do? So is this something what makes sense? I'm a small company. Does it make sense for me? Do I have this kind of compliance? And I'm sure even in a small environment, you can still set up this kind of compliance so people can work in their own speed. But maybe you need to achieve this kind of level to say, okay, what's the next step? So that's the reason we introduced everything to say, for us, infrastructure as code was the key opener, was the situation who opens us for the next questions to say, what could we optimize to? So just to setting the scene here right, and to clarify it maybe.
Okay. So we still don't have any questions. Maybe also to the participants, please also let us know in the chat your feedback, if you liked it, or if we can do something differently the next time. But there's one question coming in right now. So Engin, here it is. So the question is, what is next after policy as code? So what are the next steps? Is there something even that you can apply to make it even better, or are there any things in your mind?
We think about a different subject to say how we could ease the life of the development teams, to say, does it even make sense for a development team or maybe for an operation team to go so low level on, for example, in a Kubernetes way, to say, I want to create, for example, a deployment YAMLs or whatever, this kind of stuff. Even in Polumi, for example, does it make sense to go in every project to say, I want to create a development, a service, and so on? What's the next level? So we are looking, for example, the open application model. This is some really interesting part where we say, okay, I don't care as a developer, for example, what is underneath, what does the platform operation guys, for example, provide in the cluster. I just say, I have a deployment on a higher level, so the abstraction level is quite high. And I say, I have a deployment and I need, for example, auto scaling, horizontal scaling, and so on and so on. And I just apply this to the cluster on a really short description YAML, for example. and the cluster takes care of this, and he knows, okay, what he has to apply. So that would be something where you would ask, what is the area you would like to engage? Is to say 2020, 2021, we don't want that developers really go onto this low level of Kubernetes deployment. I hope it makes sense. Whoever asked the question.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. Thank you for answering. So I'd say now it's the last chance to ask something more.
Otherwise, hit the subscribe button, and if you have some questions, you can leave it down in the comment section. I think that Rico and the other colleagues are scanning this quite regularly. They can provide me with these questions. I can answer them also in the comment section. So feel free to use this kind of functionality YouTube is providing us. And of course, press the like button and subscribe.
Yep. Exactly. So let's do this. And just a few last words now. So thanks again, Engin, for the valuable insights and all of the information. I think.
Thank you for inviting.
Yeah, of course. And of course, thanks to all of the participants of the meetup. Was great to have you here. And there were also two other guys in the background, Oscar and Daniel, who were responsible for the organization and for the technical part of this event. So thank you for that. And yeah, I hope to see you again in the next meetup. And that's it from my side. Have a nice evening and goodbye.
Bye.